Hello, and welcome to the case planning method, a process for creating more effective daily plans. I'm here speaking at the Task Management and Time Blocking Summit 2021. And in today's talk, I'm going to teach you how to block out your day to create an actual daily schedule that tells you what to do when. And I'm going to do it using a specific method called CASE that will help you create a more effective daily schedule. So let's talk about what I'm going to talk about today. I'm going to teach you the basic CASE method that will help you create a more effective daily plan, the theory behind CASE, thinking modes, what are they, how to use them, batches and defaults, and then how to apply this theory toward other things you might need to do. So the CASE method is based around core foundational concepts that you can use to develop other processes to help you be more productive. A little bit about me. My mission is to help others live more fulfilling lives by helping them to reach their potential. I do this by creating mental models, concepts and frameworks that help people solve existing problems in new ways. My current startup is Day Optimizer, where I'm tackling time management. Day Optimizer is a time management web app that helps solopreneurs create more effective daily plans that represent their priorities using guided workflows based around neuroscience principles. In fact, it's based around the CASE method that we're going to talk about today. Finally, I'll mention that I wrote a book called Mindful Productivity, or the first draft of a book called Mindful Productivity last year. All the attendees of this talk will get a copy of this book at the end. So let's talk about the CASE day planning method. When is it useful? Well, it's really specifically useful when you've got multiple competing priorities. You need to juggle multiple projects at once. It also requires control of your own time. So it's not being dictated by others. If someone else is telling you how you need to spend your time throughout the day, then actually planning your day is not really going to be helpful. It's also not useful when it's fully booked with meetings. If you are doing a manager type role where most of your day is in meetings, then actually going through this process may not be as effective. And then finally, it's really useful when you have a lot of hard to estimate tasks. Tasks that are complex or require learning or discovery to complete. If you're doing tasks that you've done multiple times before and you can highly accurately estimate how long they're going to take, then this planning method can be useful, but won't be as useful as when you have lots of uncertain durations of your tasks. Okay, so let's go through the method. The method is commit, allocate, schedule, and evaluate. And you notice I put on the top an extra C, collect. That's because this isn't quite part of the method, but it's an important thing. At the beginning, you want to collect all your tasks, appointments, and other activities together into a single list before we kind of go through this process. Now, many of you already have that already. You already have a master task manager, or you have your calendar. You've got these things together. So for those people, the collect step is not necessary. But the first thing you want to do in this step is commit to only what today's items are. Then we're going to allocate time to each of those items. We're going to schedule those into specific time slots, but we're going to probably wind up with things that we weren't able to schedule. So we're then going to evaluate what stays and what goes. At that stage, we also might evaluate whether the order that we put them in was optimal. Maybe we need to reschedule for a more optimal order. So let's go through each of these steps in order. So first, the commit step. The commit step is about narrowing your focus. It's about taking that master task list and creating a daily task list. And the goal here is to help you avoid being distracted and overwhelmed throughout the day. Often we have so much on our to-do list that whenever we look at it, we're overwhelmed. Or we look at our to-do list and we see an item on there that we don't really need to be working on today, but it's easy, it's quick, we do it. We grab it, we get distracted by it. So we're not strategic in how we're using our time. So by taking time in this step to actually narrow down that list to just what we plan to do today, it's going to help keep us more focused. Now, a key to this is that we want to also include any regular activities that take up time in our day, things like lunch and exercise. And the reason is this is a day planning method that is going to account for time. It's a time management method. And so if we don't account for everything that takes up time in our day, we're going to have an inaccurate sense of how much time we have available in our day, and we're going to overcommit. Okay, so the next step is to allocate time. What we're going to do is we're going to go through each of those things that we committed to in the previous step, and we're going to assign time to them. We're going to say, okay, this I'm going to spend 15 minutes on, this I'm going to spend an hour on, this I'm going to spend half an hour on. Now it's important to note that this is time allocation, not estimation. Time estimation is figuring out how long a task takes to get done, while time allocation is merely saying how long am I going to spend on it today. Time allocation is so much easier than time estimation. The other thing about this step is it helps us calibrate our allocations. So I encourage you to compare your allocations to one another to improve them. So if I do a half an hour for lunch, it's going to take me at least half an hour for dinner. So this helps us come up with better allocations. The next step is to schedule. Put those items into time slots. Go and take each item and put it into a time slot of what to do when. Now, if you want to be a little bit more advanced, pay attention to the order in which you're putting them in. Align them to your personal rhythms, your energy rhythms, your circadian rhythms. So if you are most productive in the morning, do all the tasks that require that high energy in the morning, and do the tasks that are more administrative in the afternoon. If you're flipped, perhaps you do your administrative tasks in the morning, and then you do your more productive tasks in the afternoon. Also, it can be useful if you're doing flow tasks where you kind of get into flow and you do creative stuff to schedule optional tasks after that. Because if you're in the flow, what you can say is, I'm going to then drop that optional task. I'm going to stay in the flow and keep going. Otherwise, I'm going to put this thing aside and I'm going to do my optional task. So it gives you some flexibility to adjust your schedule throughout the day. If you put a hard stop at the end of a flow task, it doesn't matter if you're in the flow or not. You need to then stop. So the final step in the case process is evaluate. And this is a step that's easy to kind of overlook. Is what you want to do is you want to reschedule based on your priorities. So what often happens when we go through this process is we've committed to things today, we've allocated time, we get to scheduling it, and not everything fits on our schedule. We often want to do more than we can actually do. So we now need to actually go and make these trade-off decisions. Should something that is not on the schedule really be on the schedule? And if so, what do I need to remove to put that on my schedule? And so I call this the process of implicit prioritization, because we're not deciding priorities up front. What we're doing is we're actually comparing items and saying which of these two is most important. And that is a very powerful prioritization technique, because it's much easier to say, is A or B more important? And by doing this, we're kind of going through and we're saying we're building the optimal schedule that meets our priorities the most. And then what we want to do is we want to remove the unscheduled things from our list, because we don't have time to achieve them. If we keep them on our list, they're going to distract us throughout the day. So by removing them, it helps us keep us more focused. Now, if you wind up being an overachiever and you get through your schedule with time to spare, you can always go back and look at those lists and add them back in, but it's best to keep them away for right now. Okay, so again, the case process is commit, allocate, schedule, and evaluate. Commit to only today's items, allocate time to each, schedule each into a time slot, and then evaluate what stays and what goes. So let's talk about a few variations of case. So in the beginning, I call this a day planning method, not a daily scheduling method, because the individual steps can be combined in different ways to create different types of daily plans. Now, I won't go into when these plans are relevant, but there are different times when you may not want a full daily schedule. So the first one is, what happens if I just want a commitment list? I just want to focus my attention today. I don't really have time, or I can't allocate all the time. I just want that commitment list. So then I just do the first step, the C. That creates a daily to-do list, right? My commitment list today. Now, if I take it one step further and I go and I allocate, now I have an allocation list, right? This is an allocated commitment list. It lets me see my daily to-do list, but I have a sense of how long things take on that list. So that can be useful to kind of gauge what to do next, especially if I'm just ad hoc going through my day and I've got a meeting in a half an hour. Well, let me grab something that's going to take less than half an hour. Finally, a time bucket is if I do the C and the A and the E step. So if I commit, I allocate, and then I evaluate. And so what a time bucket is, it's like an allocated list, right? Where I've actually gone through, I've committed to stuff, I've assigned time, but I then specifically constrain myself. I say, I only have this amount of time in my day, right? I'm only gonna be working from 9 until 5, so I only have 8 hours. So now I've got a fixed bucket of time. And so now I need to evaluate what goes in that bucket and what doesn't go in that bucket. Again, we're going into what should stay and what should go. And so by doing this, I'm helping create a more realistic list of what I can achieve today. So that would be a time bucket. So these are different ways you can combine these steps to create different types of daily plans. So let's go through the theory behind CASE. First of all is thinking modes. A thinking mode is a specific way of thinking. Think of it as a brain activation pattern. So convergent versus divergent thought. In one case, I'm brainstorming, I'm trying to think of as many different ideas as I can, that's divergent, and then I'm trying to analyze, that's convergent, right? Thinking modes often rely on working memory. They require access to a specific set of information, a specific context, right? And they often answer one question. Answering the question what uses a different thinking mode than answering the question when. I should back up for a second and say thinking modes are my hypothesis. I've noticed this as I'm processing information that I tend to go into certain modes. My brain activates in certain ways. I have to load certain contexts into my brain to process these things. So I'm calling this a thinking mode. You might discover this in your own processing. As we go through this, maybe you'll recognize these different types of thinking modes. But right now, there haven't been actual studies around this yet. I'm hoping people will start actually doing some studies around thinking modes. So let's go into one of the dangers of thinking modes is mode switching. Just like task switching can make us more unproductive, I believe mode switching can as well. Because mode switching requires us to constantly reload our context. We have to reload into our working memory the context of what we're working on. And it also requires switching the activation pattern of our brain. So when we're in one activation pattern, we kind of get on a roll and we gain steam. Switching into another activation pattern can disrupt that. Batching. So another key part of building this process is that you notice everything is batched. We're not using the one-piece flow where we take an item, we commit to it, we allocate it, we schedule it, we take another item, we commit to it, we allocate it, we schedule it. We're batching everything together. And what this allows us to do is focus on one question at a time. This speeds up processing for the step. So if I can just go down my task list and just say, am I going to do it today or not? Am I going to do it today or not, right? I don't have to worry about how much time am I allocating? Am I scheduling it? What order to do it in? All those are other questions that actually require other thinking modes and other contexts to process. So if I can just go through and just say, yes, no, I can be much more efficient at selecting. And then when I go through the allocation step, I can go through and I can go, okay, 15 minutes, 30 minutes. And again, batching that allocation step, I'm just asking that one question of how much time do I want to spend on this today? And then, as I said before, this allows calibration between different items. Is when you batch things into a different step, I can actually calibrate. I can say, does this, again, if I spend 30 minutes for lunch, I should spend at least 30 minutes for dinner. How do these, my different allocations compare against one each other? It also allows us to make portfolio decisions, right? So take the schedule step. If I'm actually going and doing one-piece flow where I grab an item, I think of an item to do today, I commit to it, I allocate it, and then I schedule it. I commit to another item, allocate and schedule it. Each time, I'm just making individual decisions. I'm deciding, this goes into this time slot, just based purely on the item itself. Whereas if I have a whole list of everything that I need to do today, I can build a more optimized portfolio of how I'm going to spend my time. I can really say, okay, I need to do this first, then this, then this. And I can evaluate exactly how much time I'm going to allocate those things. So shifting over to portfolio decision helps us create a more strategic plan when we're doing these things. And then finally, it encourages or it helps avoid premature completion. So if you're actually just doing one item at a time, once you fill up your schedule, you tend to then stop, right? So if I just take my task list and I'm just scheduling each item directly off my task list, then once I've filled up my schedule, I stop. But there still might be other important items that I need to do today. So I'm not going through that evaluation phase of saying, okay, now that I see everything and how it comes together, what am I actually going to do? How am I going to actually construct my day? So the idea that by batching stuff, I actually have too much to put on my list, that allows me to really construct the perfect schedule, because I'm not just stopping once my schedule is full. I'm stopping when my schedule meets all my needs. Finally, are defaults. You'll notice defaults throughout this whole process. And what a default tends to be is a psychological, it creates a psychological nudge. Because if I create a default, I say, the time, for instance, the allocate step creates a bunch of defaults around time. So when I say something is going to take an hour, when I get to schedule, the default is that it's going to take an hour. I can change the time there, but the default is an hour. So changing that default requires more effort. So it's a psychological nudge toward something that we want to do. So in the case of allocation, it prevents some self-cheating. Because often what happens is, as I'm going through this process, is if I'm just actually not batching and I'm just going through and not creating these defaults, when I get to that schedule step, as I see the amount of time in my day shrink, right? The next item that I allocate, I'm going to allocate less time to it because I want to fit more into my day. So I cheat myself doing that. By creating this default on the allocation step, by making sure I assign all my allocations before I even look at my schedule, I've created these defaults that are more realistic. And now I need to make the argument of why am I going to change that time? Why is that not there? The final thing that it does encourages deliberateness. So if you notice in the first step, we start off with a blank slate on our commitment list. It's a commitment list. It's not that we're working off our to-do list. We're actually copying things from our to-do list to this commitment list. So it creates this, it makes a deliberate act of adding it to that list. And that helps us make sure that everything that we add to that list is intentional. So the concept of defaults, either having a zero default or having a value-based default, forces us to reason more deliberately about how we're using our time. So let's talk about applying the theory to case, right? So in the collect step, right, that the thinking mode here is brainstorming. I want to say, what is everything I need to do today? Sorry, I skipped a little bit forward. I added the collect step back in just because I want to talk about that step in the context of these things. So in the thinking mode, we're brainstorming, right? The question that we're asking ourselves is, what am I missing that I need to do, right? What am I missing? Because I want to make sure that I account for everything that I might need to do today. Now, how batching helps here is I can see everything that I've already has on my list, and I can look for the gaps. I can scan down, load all those into my working memory, and go, okay, where are the gaps? What am I missing? Now when we move on to the next step, the commit step, our thinking mode here is selection. I'm selecting what items do I actually want to try to do today, right? So that's the question. What do I want to attempt to do today? How defaults help here, again, as I mentioned, is we're starting with a blank slate. So every selection is intentional. It's helping us be mindful about what we try to do each day. It's creating this intentionality. And then on the next step, allocate, we're analyzing our needs. How much time does each of these actually require? How much time do I want to spend on it today? And so by showing these all together, by batching them, we can see all those allocations and calibrate against them much more easily. Finally, on the schedule step, the thinking mode, I like to call it playing Tetris with your time, right? It's figuring out how am I going to slot all these things together and make the picture complete, and really for each item I'm asking, when do I want to do this today? In this case, the defaults help by making it harder to under-allocate as the schedule fills up, because I already decided how much time I'm spending on everything before I even look at my schedule. Now those are my defaults. So I'm going to create a more realistic schedule as it fills up. And I'm going to be able to make more realistic trade-offs, because I'm going to be able to say, I need at least an hour to work on this today. And so if I can't find an hour on my schedule and it's not high priority, I can't work on it. So that's one of the benefits of the schedule step. So now going to the evaluate step, we've got the thinking mode here is weighing trade-offs. Which of these two items are most important? Right? So when I have something that hasn't been scheduled yet and my schedule is filled up, I have to take the item and scan down the list and go through each of the items that are already on my schedule and say which of these two items are most important. And maybe I find one that I say, okay, the unscheduled item is more important. Okay, remove the lower priority item from the schedule and put that item on the schedule. So how batching helps with this is, again, changes our decisions from individual decisions to a portfolio decision. I'm trying to see how do the combination of all these items together maximize my productivity and maximize the effectiveness with what I'm doing. Let's talk a little bit about how to apply this theory elsewhere. So I mentioned at the beginning that the underlying theory can apply to other processes. So I just want to talk about a process most people are familiar with, the content generation process. And so we can think of these as three different steps: outline, write, and edit. Right? So if I want to publish a blog post, I can just dive right in, like outline as I go, think about how I'm writing it, and edit as I go. But that tends to be less efficient because we're jumping between these different thinking modes, right? So if I think in terms of the writing process, the outline phase is a brainstorming phase. It's an organizing and analyzing flow, right? I might even divide outlining into brainstorming first, then organizing those thoughts. The writing phase uses this creation composition thinking mode, where I'm actually then figuring out how do I want to express my thoughts. And then finally, the edit phase is where I need to then focus on the details, take an outside perspective and say, how is someone else going to perceive what I just wrote? And the question there I'm asking is, what do I want to change? So again, these are asking three different questions using three different thinking modes. What should I write? How should I express myself? What should I change? So by actually doing these as three different steps, we optimize the way our brain works. We make it more efficient. We can go one step further, is we're writing multiple articles, is I can stay in the outlining thinking mode longer, and I can batch that together. I can batch coming up with a whole bunch of different ideas, my idea creation, then batch outlining those together into different outlines, then batch writing those, and then batch editing them. And that can even make me more efficient. So a quick review. The CASE process is a 4-step process for creating more effective plans. And I've been using that today to create daily plans, but again, you can also use this process to create weekly or monthly plans. Again, the 4 steps are: commit to only today's items, allocate time to each item, schedule each item into a time slot, and evaluate what should stay and what should go. The theory behind CASE is based around 3 key concepts: thinking modes, which are specific ways of thinking that require a specific context; batching, which is answering one question all at once for every item in the list; and then defaults, setting defaults to make better decisions in the next step. That's my talk. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you can use this planning method to create more effective daily plans. If you're interested in trying this process out in software, you can actually visit dayoptimizer.com for a 7-day trial This plan is implemented in Day Optimizer as a core part of the software. If you have any questions or comments about the talk, please email me at trevor@dayoptimizer. I'm also on Twitter @fastfedora. And for those of you who want these slides, they'll be available afterwards at dayoptimizer.com/time-blocking-summit. I'll also add there a special offer for Day Optimizer, as well as a copy of the first draft of my book, Mindful Productivity, and other resources related to this talk. Thank you once again, and I hope you have a productive day.